Hello, everyone. One of the, so as you know, I'm kind of reworking these module questions because some of them, um, I gave this new idea, right, of like three page or write up or like a 3 minute video or audio, and it didn't like map on perfectly to a lot of the questions, right? So, which I can't believe over that oversight, and I apologize for that, but I'm spending this weekend getting this all fixed up. And I have my plan now, and I know which ones I need to fix up and which ones just need slight tweaks. And actually, quite a few near the end are completely okay. So by the time you get this, I'll either be almost done or I'll be done, depending on if I release this a bit earlier. But this is intended to replace the questions for chapter or for module 3. Okay, and some of you watched the cave painting video. Some of you had trouble accessing it. Some of you were unsure what it was about because it was kind of this long idea of like this first picture or this first cave painting in a couple. I guess I just wanted to like. I think this is actually one of the most interesting areas of what art is. This is the earliest art that exists, that's human made, are these stained rocks. And I was showing this to my daughter, and she's like, "What is that?" I'm like, because I showed her this picture, and I was like, "It's kind of like it's stained rock," and she's like, "It looks like kids did that," and it's like, yeah, kind of. Like you could see that as like this image on the screen is like, I don't know, a community of people where they all touch the wall. And I want to talk about this for a sec because it's actually pretty interesting because you think about like what's going to exist 10,000 years from now. Like I'm going to make the point in a sec that like some of the most well-known cave paintings are tens of thousands of years old, right? Despite the fact that the humans that lived during these times we often refer to as like prehistoric or, in the cartoonish image like cavemen. Many of these sketches actually show impressive creativity and skill. There's no concrete, so I'm reading something here for you. There's no concrete universal theories about the purpose of these ancient paintings. Did these prehistoric people have the urge to express themselves artistically? Did they want to make historic records for future generations to see? Or were they merely just trying to communicate with others who might use the caves for shelter, right? Or like to each other or to others that might use the caves. Because of the protected underground environments, many cave paintings are in remarkably good shape, including, I can just press the, sorry, I'm talking out loud to myself here because I'm trying to read the notes here. I can scroll with just the arrow. Okay, so I was just, sorry, I messed up the sentence, but I was saying that because of the location, right? Because these cave paintings are in like these highly isolated, geologically protected places, many of the cave paintings are in remarkably good shape, including this Argentina Cave of the Hands. Right, like that's one of the wildest. So what I want to do is I'm going to show you the question for today, or for the replacement question, and it's just one question. But then I want to show you like these. I found a cool website that kind of gives 10 of the most famous ones, and I've been fascinated with cave paintings for ever since I read the book Supernatural by Graham Hancock, because he makes this really interesting point that like, you're going to see this here, like a lot of there's incredible similarities between cave paintings around the world, and you'll see that we're talking from like China to Argentina to France and Spain to places in Africa to Australia. Why would there be such similarities in these earliest expressions of art? Because you have to also keep in mind, like 10,000 years from now, I don't know if I'm already ranty. This is like the first slide, but like 10,000 years from now, what's going to exist from right now? From even your house, like the wood, almost everything's going to have disappeared. Rock will still exist. Stained rock. Think of how much, like, not just cave paintings, but think of like all the ancient monuments and monoliths and all that, that's all rock based, rock, right? It's like so much of our, what speaks to us from our ancient prehistoric, right? Prehistory, before things were written. So again, if you don't find this interesting at all, you can stop. If you're not going to do this module, I guess you could not watch this, but I would definitely encourage you to, because I don't know, cave paintings are pretty wild and pretty awesome. Okay. So as psychology students and as people interested in psych in general, you probably get questions with this starting point like a million times, right? Like, what's the what's the psychological significance of insert the topic of the day? And one of the reasons for that is because it makes sense, right? Like, if you're going to be studying psychology, you have to study the anatomy of the brain. You got to study, cognitive systems. You got to study things like developmental psychology and evolutionary psychology and biological psychology. And you got to understand therapeutics. But at the same time, like the therapeutic psychology and the history of psychology, and your Carl Rogers and your Viktor Frankls, but psychological significance is like getting to this question of, okay, so some of these cave paintings I think are in the areas of like 20 to 15,000 years ago. There's kind of lots of ranges, and we'll talk about different ones. But like, we think Homo sapiens have been at basically our same anatomical state for in the neighborhood of 200,000 years. We think about 70,000 years ago, there was this cognitive revolution that, if you read the book Sapiens, which is a pretty groundbreaking, interesting book, one of the interesting things it talks about is the evidence for this cognitive revolution. This this birth of mythology and religion and all this stuff, but this like ability to think at this, and the causes of it are debated, right? But this seems to be roughly 70,000 years ago. But if you think 70,000 years ago, then 15,000 years ago doesn't sound as long ago, right? All of recorded history is only a few thousand years, right? Like, the earliest records we have of anything are like the Sumerians and the Babylonians, and like, that's like maybe 8,000 years ago. The findings in Göbekli Tepe, which are like probably the oldest currently dated archaeology remains, which is in like the Turkey area. They date at like 14,000 years ago. It's like, we know like very little about what was going on 20,000 years ago. And so this is art from there, though. From your ancestors, from all of our ancestors. So what's the psychological, oh man, after that huge rant, then I messed that up. So what's the psychological significance of studying cave paintings? All right, so that's the question. And I wanted to give you the question at the beginning, because now what I want to do is, if you're interested in answering this question, now what I'm going to do is show you like 10, in my opinion, super cool examples of this, and tell you a little bit about it. And if you're going to answer this question, it'd be a good idea to like have a piece of paper and take a few notes as we go through this, right? Because you're trying to ask this question of like, how does looking at this help us maybe understand, I don't know, some truth about humanity and the psychological significance of that kind of an understanding. So I got the images here from, I'll just shout it out quick, thoughtcode.com, which actually, like, first of all, I've seen this picture like a million times. These pictures are very famous, but I thought that they did a really nice job of just, I don't know, they had just really clean versions of the pictures, and I took some of these write-ups that I'm going to share with you. So yeah, kind of doing a review of an article, interesting article from thoughtcode.com with this presentation. But So I would recommend checking it out. It's an interesting website. You don't have to, just throwing it in there. But these are probably some of the most famous ones, right? These is the Lacaus Caves in southwest France. I have here not the oldest example of this kind of art in the world, but considered among the most stunning. The pictures, painted approximately 17,000 years ago, depict large animals such as bulls and horses, which thrived in this part of Europe during the Paleolithic era. Yeah, the Paleolithic era. I should do a slide on what the Paleolithic era means. Um, but yeah, this time period, because that's almost starting to talk about geological time. Unfortunately, though, that these caves are closed because like people were basically wrecking it, and because not necessarily through vandalism, but just as increasing amount of tourists were coming in and out, there was starting to get like mold and stuff in the cave. So if you're curious travelers will have to settle for a replica of the large caves, which is about 200 meters away from the real cavern. There's currently a major effort underway to protect the originals. But this is like, um, there's a YouTube video called like the Cave of Dreams or something like that, if you were to Google that, and it's about these caves, and they go in with like a camera and go all around, and it's like, it's stunning. And you wonder, like, what is that? Is that just like obviously it's like that specifically, because there's like rooms after rooms of walls of this in this specific cave, and it's like, were these drawings that were like basically like I was saying before, like are these like kind of communicating amongst a tribe or amongst a group, or is this like communicating with the next person that might be using this space, or is this like artistic expression, or is this just random, or is this like religious expression? So this example, the Cave of Swimmers. Tourists can see original paintings in another famous site, the Cave of Swimmers. These paintings depict people swimming, they think. But the cave is located in one of the last places you would associate with such water-based activities. So I'm reading just these, like if it sounds like my reading's weird, it's just because I'm just like reading these little write-ups on each of these places. Because again, what I want you don't have to worry about like jotting notes from necessarily what I'm saying, right? I want you to be thinking more like big picture about like what's interesting psychologically about looking at this. So anyways, one of the things that's interesting about this is that it's in the middle of the desert, and it looks like depicting swimming. Some scientists hypothesize that a large lake or river was located in the area in prehistoric times, prior to desertification. So desertification means like when topsoil gets so bad it turns to desert. Desertification. Sorry, I don't know why I felt like I should break that word down for you. Many people might be familiar with this cave because it was featured in the film The English Patient. Parts of the cave have been damaged by visitors, but local authorities have made an effort to train guides so that they can keep tourists away from doing any kind of further damage. And also because of the remote location, few people actually visit it, which is one of a number in the area that have ancient paintings. Yeah, that's the other thing is I'm just trying to show you some different cool examples, but these are all over the world. And again, why talk about this in the psychology of art class? Well, I think it's relevant to discuss the earliest art that exists. And not only that, the earliest art that exists is the earliest capture of human expression that exists. Now, this is wild, right? So it's like these paintings in Sanitaire, so this is in northern Spain. These paintings are all down this like hallway, right? And like that looks like, I don't even know what that looks like some wild insect monster with like it almost looks centipede-ish, the middle thing, and then but then I can also see that as like the hairy, almost like, like the back of a horse's head, and then you can see like an eye. And so that almost looks like a bull, actually, now that I look at it. Now that I like really focus, it's totally a bull. I almost just can't believe I didn't see that right away. But what's interesting about that, and what could hopefully blow your mind about that, is they think that this was actually painted by Neanderthals, not humans. This might be our best example of Neanderthal art. Some researchers think that this was made by Neanderthals, 20,000 years ago. This cave was completely sealed by a rock fall, so these paintings were well preserved until their discovery in 1880. It took a decade to convince skeptics who thought that ancient humans were not sophisticated enough to make such paintings that these could really be from prehistoric times. So then it just says again, like, a bunch of these write-ups just keep making the same point that like tourism to those areas is like now heavily restricted because of water dam. It seems like for whatever reason, and well, it makes sense, right? Why these things are so preserved is because they're basically encased, and then you open it up and you have a huge transfer of organic people, like humans, through that are breathing and perspiring, and that's going to change the internal environment around this, right? And linked to like, well, it keeps bringing up the word mold. Okay, I'm trying to keep this quick. Sorry, I'm getting caught up, but I just find this fascinating topic, right? Because then Graham Hancock in his book makes the suggestion of like, because he lines it up so interestingly, right? I'm just trying to show you different interesting examples. He actually really tries to make this point of showing how there's comparisons and how there's similarities between what's painted in the caves in Argentina and in China and in Australia and in Europe. And it's like, these people weren't supposed to be in contact in our understanding of history. Were they? Or were they maybe engaging in some kind of hallucinatory shamanic ritual and having similar tripos or shamanic visions or whatever you want to call it? Is this the earliest religion? Because remember, this is like thousands and thousands and thousands of years before even like the oldest religions we know of, like the Greeks, like the oldest religion, the religion with no name, right? Like the Greco-Roman religion. You've heard of the gods like Zeus and some of the, not Hinduism, but like what was the beliefs that eventually became Hinduism. That religion is very old. But the oldest religion is definitely the Greco-Roman. But that's a topic for a different day. But yeah, but if these are religious related, that's interesting because that's thousands and thousands and thousands of years before we thought people were practicing religion. And if this was a Neanderthal cave, now that's even more wild because now you're saying it's a non-human or non-Homo sapien humanoid. Hominid is the word they often use. And that's a picture they drew. So one of the reasons I'm kind of ranting, and I don't have this all scripted, like as you can probably tell, I have like a paragraph or two of like a little write-up of just kind of the facts um, that I copied into this PowerPoint just so that I could give you like the correct information, like that this is Katadoo National Park in Australia in the Northern Territory. Like I wouldn't have known it's in the Northern Territory, but that like Australia, because in Australia it's all over the place. Um, you can see like this is so interesting, right? Like those heads, and like if you look at the red guy, like kind of near the bottom, it's like I don't want to say that it looks like alien head, but it kind of does, right? And it's like, and then some of the other ones, it's like there's a lot going on in that picture. If you look to the left side underneath the white guy there, that looks the alienish, you can see something that looks almost like a turtle, a white turtle. And then there's like a spidery fish looking thing red. And it's like, is this just doodles? Is this advanced artwork? Is this spiritual religion? You know, like one of the questions in the next module, or one of the ones coming up, is about the function of art. Like, what is the purpose of doing art? It's like, what, and this is why I'm thinking that you might find this sort of interesting, is it's completely speculative about in terms of why they did that, right? Like, and I don't know if it would ever not be, because unless they were also somehow using some kind of writing and we somehow found it and we're somehow able to just transcribe it and or decipher it, and it somehow spoke of the reason, right? Because we can't ask them. By definition of being prehistory, writing doesn't exist from that time. So yeah, kind of interesting. These paintings are under rocks that overhang where people took shelter from the elements. Some of these, again, thought to be 20,000 years old. Um, these paintings tell the history of human life in Australia from prehistoric times all the way up to the first contact with non-native settlers and explorers. For many of these ancient artists, the act of painting was considered more important than the resulting image itself. For this reason, sorry, some of the older pictures in the park were actually painted over at a later date. Yikes. But I guess if it's, but see, that's interesting right there. Because I said yikes, because I'm like, oh, it's wrecking it. But then I guess if it's the same people painting over it, that's interesting too, right? Are they like using it as paper? Is it like less sacred? Like would That's another interesting thought too, right? Is like, is there something in our minds that want us to see that what you're looking at on the screen as like super sacred and religious? And is it like, is that us adding it? And is that what art is? Like, again, this is one of the reasons I'm ranting like this, is to maybe give you an idea of, and maybe some of the ideas I'm saying, I don't know, maybe one of the ideas kind of sticks with you and you can run with it and explain it a bit better. All right, so I'm going to just keep doing this for a few more. So check out this one's pretty wild. This is in Bulgaria. Mangra Cave. Contains paintings that were made, we think, this is all going to be by carbon dating, right? So they'll be dating the rock around it in the cave for how fast the carbon's decaying. The images are thought to depict festivals, important events, and deities unique to the ancient Balkans, right? So the Balkan area is that kind of like Eastern Europe. There's also evidence of a solar calendar, which is pretty wild. One of the oldest to ever be discovered. After studying the images, scientists discovered they were painted using bat guano, bat poo. So that's an interesting fact that those were made with poo. Stained, I guess. So a lot of these paints are stains, which I guess makes sense. It's like stained rock. Visitors can currently view some of these paintings during a visit, though you need to basically, it's like a paid tour thing. Right, so these are all basically protected sites now. So I'll be quick with this one because I already showed you a little bit about this. The first two slides where I was just giving my intro and I talked about the assignment question, and it had the background wall of all the hands. This is the same caves, so, but I wanted this in the top 10 for sure, this cave of hands in Argentina. Some of this is the most stunning. Um, it's hard not to see, like, you look at that human hand on the red, right? It's like there's something about, like, you can see your kid or like even an adult tracing their hand, and it's like you can also see it looks like deer or something on the move, maybe being hunted, maybe it's cattle being led. Oh, this would be like way earlier than that. Yeah, it would definitely, I would assume that's definitely hunting. But then it's weird, right? Because it's like because this would be before we would think that domestication of animals would have been. But if you look up at the top guy above the deer, the like 5 deer or whatever, above the third one, looks like there's a guy running with possibly something in his hand. Like you could easily picture that guy hunting them. But then it also looks like in front of the first one that there's a yellow guy running in the same direction of them, which is kind of interesting. The Cave of Hands. Yeah, most depict hunting and wild animals. The handprints and other images were made more than 9,000 years ago. Most of the stencils, oh, this is interesting. Most of the stencils are of left hands, which suggests that the painters made the images themselves using some kind of paint pipe held in their right hand. Paint pipe. The paint was blown out of the device onto and around the left hand. Oh yeah, actually, now that when you look at it again, it does look like that, right? Like it totally looks like spray paint, basically. That they put their hand there and like spray painted, but obviously not with like a spray paint can, right? Like by blowing it. So now in India, this is where we get crazy because this goes back another whole 10,000 years. They think this is 30,000 years ago. And like, so this is deep into ancient history. These are some of the oldest cave paintings in the world. These images have been remarkably well preserved over the years. Scientists estimate that these may be, yeah, 30,000 years old. Yeah, so it's these, I just, sorry, I shouldn't just read in my head, but it says some of the images are much younger, with the newest ones created during medieval times. So these, a lot of these are like massive, massive, huge cave systems that have been used as these, like, I'm going to assume if it's in India, likely like these places of, well, if it's in India, it would be Hinduism. But like, but again, it's like maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I want to assume that it's like that there's a religious or a ceremonial aspect to it, and maybe it's just drawings, and that's why it's kind of so cool, is because it's almost an unanswerable question, and maybe it's both. Okay, so I've been making this point kind of a couple times, and I just quickly looked it up so I can make this point and give you a little more accurate stat. So think about this for a sec. They think that, like, you've heard of Stonehenge, probably, right, in England? They think that that is roughly 3,000 years old, or 3,000 BC. So it's confusing because the BC you always have to then add 2022, right? So 3,000 BC was really 5,000 years ago. But if Stonehenge is 5,000 years ago, okay, and that's one of the oldest stone monuments we have, 5,000 years. Those hands on the wall in that Indonesian cave you're looking at are 40,000. This is the oldest picture I'm going to show you. 40,000 years old, they think. If this is accurate, it would mean that these paintings are the oldest ones, older than the European ones. Yeah, recent carbon dating's put it at 40,000 years. Featuring hand stencils like in Argentina, so it looks like that same kind of spray paint idea. There's also figures of animals. People can visit this cave as part of a tour that also includes stops at rock formations around the area. Right, so it's like just the same thing. It's like, if you're saying, like, what's some of the psychological significance of this? It's like, one of the interesting things is just these people had your same brain. You're seeing a glimpse into the timetable into the time capsule. I mean, this is gonna sound silly, but obviously no video or audio or even writing exists from that time, but art does. This is the most controversial one I'm going to show you. This is an image in northern Brazil. Not controversial because of what it depicts. Like, it's not like it's like graphic or something like that. It's controversial because, so there's this idea of the Clovis, and if you're interested, it's spelled Clovis, Clovis tribe. And they were supposed to be the first people in Americas. So what I'm basically saying is these cave paintings are really inconvenient because there's over 1,000 of them across northern Brazil, and they seem to have been made by people before before our understanding of history says that there's people in that area. Yeah, like the history of the earth is of humanity is so complex. There's more than 150 rock art sites in that one park in Brazil. So all over the place. So I wanted to show you this too as the last one because this is from Somaliland, which is north of the kind of more popular Somalia. You see here both humans and animals depicted. These paintings all through these caves were apparently known of by the locals. Like, the locals knew about these paintings, but it wasn't until like after 2000 that the kind of broader research community learned about them. These paintings, which remain quite vivid because of the arid climate, are estimated to be roughly 5 to 11,000 years old. Remember, if it's 5 5,000 years ago, Stonehenge. 11,000 years ago, like we know almost nothing about what's going on in the world 11,000 years ago. And that's why I find it so fascinating. It's because even though we don't know much about what was going on, we do know that definitely lots was going on. It's like the most interesting documentaries, unfortunately, we'll never see. All right, I hope that that was decent and hopefully kind of interesting and gave you some ideas to think about potentially if you want to answer this question. Take care.